had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Hello and welcome to another killer episode of FinTech Insider, where we cut through all the noise and get straight to the people who are actually shaping the future of finance. AI has certainly been somewhat of a buzzword in 2025, with everyone from fintechs like Revolut to global institutions like LSEG adopting it. But aside from who's using it today, we want to drill into the brains behind it and explore what's actually doing to reshape financial services. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to welcome Matt Weaver, Head of Solutions for EMEA at OpenAI, to today's show. Thanks for joining us, Matt. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited for our discussion today. So a little bit of background about Matt and what we're going to be talking about today. So Matt leads a specialist team dedicated to helping organizations from universities to startups to the world's largest enterprises unlock the full potential of OpenAI's models and products. With a deep background spanning AI, engineering, and financial services, Matt brings a value-focused, hands-on approach to solution design and technical advisory in this rapidly moving space. Under his leadership, Matt's team partners closely with customers to identify their most pressing challenges and develop secure, scalable deployments of ChatGPT and other OpenAI tech. They collaborate on everything from solutions design to managing complex security and compliance requirements, ensuring that businesses achieve meaningful results and sustain competitive advantage through AI. So it's quite a critical discussion as we sit here today. OpenAI is announcing major momentum across Europe with new customers including Revolut, Alika Bank, HG, EQT, and Permira, along with a fresh impact data from Zopa and Oak North. So as stated on stage at the FT Global Banking Summit on December the 3rd, OpenAI is highlighting how generative AI is fast becoming the operating system for core financial services workflows, from fraud detection and investment analysis to lending and customer support. On top of that, LSEG revealed its collaboration with OpenAI, rolling out ChatGPT Enterprise to 4,000 employees and building a market connector platform, that's MCP, that brings its financial data and news directly into ChatGPT. So today, Matt and I will explore what all this means, how AI is becoming the operating system for financial services as financial institutions move beyond chatbots and AI experimentation, how OpenAI is helping Europe's financial sector adopt AI safely and responsibly, and how AI can strengthen Europe's competitiveness in financial services. So let's dive in. And we're going to start, Matt, with just a bit of a dive into your career and like what brought you to where you are today at OpenAI?
Well, yeah, that's a big question. I guess a lot of things led me here, but so I've been doing roles like this one for the last 10 years or so, and that's kind of sitting on the fault line between technology and how that actually gets applied inside of businesses. As you mentioned in the introduction there, my team today is guiding our enterprise customers through understanding the pace of everything that's happening in AI right now. And not only that, how to best apply it in their industry. So I started my career actually in engineering software, like physical engineering. So working with like companies like Rolls-Royce and Dyson and some of the F1 teams, helping them design their physical products. From there, I moved into kind of a more retail space. So working with application monitoring software. So kind of retail websites, making sure they don't crash and stay up and the checkout's all working smoothly. And then I spent the 4 years before OpenAI working inside a fintech startup. It was a classic Silicon Valley early stage Series B company. I was one of the first hires in Europe. And I guess we were an AI company there before everybody was an AI company. This is before ChatGPT. So writing lots of Python code and doing classical machine learning. And the thing we were solving there was extracting unstructured data out of documents, which, financial institutions have at huge scale. Imagine if you're submitting documents for a loan application, someone has to transcribe all that data out of those, or doing KYC and onboarding. What was really interesting about that experience for me in that startup before I came to this role was that I had a front row seat to the way that the entire industry was disrupted as this new wave of transformers-based AI models, which is a new technology that came out around 2019, and then large language models. And the moment ChatGPT burst onto the scene just over 3 years ago, that kind of changed everything. And it became clear to me that kind of the best way for me to have an impact and to continue working on these super interesting use cases inside of large enterprises and the financial services industry was to actually come on board at OpenAI. So we've been rapidly scaling the team out here. It's a super eclectic mix of tasks. Some weeks on stage talking about the way our products are used. Other times working closely with security teams to help them kind of unblock and deploy our technology. And really the thing that interests me most about this area, I think that the financial services industry can sometimes have an unfair reputation for being slow to adopt new technology. It's true that this space is regulated and that can, sometimes slow things down or cause friction. But actually, the opportunity inside of financial services is bigger than almost any other industry. It's one of our fastest growing segments in terms of the customers that we work with at OpenAI. And the enterprises that are doing this really well today, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of them, are seeing huge gains already. And what's most exciting there is that as this technology continues to improve, as the pace of AI continues to develop, we're going to fundamentally transform the way that this entire industry operates.
Yeah, it's an exciting place to be in financial services for a change, because I've also been in the industry for very, very long, and I agree there's so many interesting use cases. Your background, I think, just gives you this very interesting kind of helicopter view of how different types of institutions are approaching and adopting AI. Are there any kind of patterns that you've noticed, fintech versus incumbent, government institution versus private, as to how they're approaching AI?
Yeah, for sure. I would actually say what's been most interesting, and you're right, I get to kind of speak to, hundreds of companies at a time around how they're thinking about and deploying AI. And I actually would say that the patterns that we see aren't necessarily fragmented by a legacy or newer kind of challenger institution. We see examples such as BBVA, which is like one of the largest banks in Spain and Latin America, adopting our technology. They just they're rolling out now ChatGPT Enterprise, the secure enterprise-grade version of our platform, to all employees globally, which is like really exciting. And then at the same time, smaller organizations such as Zopa, kind of more of a fintech player, successfully deploying our technology, both ChatGPT Enterprise, and then also using our APIs to develop ways to increase the quality of their customer service interactions. But the patterns, so it's not really broken down by if you're an older, more legacy institution or a newer one, but there are these common patterns that we're seeing of the companies that are doing it really well. I think the components of an AI strategy for a financial institution that really work, you kind of have to tackle it from two angles, right? Bottoms up and tops down. That bottoms up component is really about employee AI literacy. We see that, it doesn't matter how brilliantly written your AI strategy is, if it's not kind of just built into the foundation of the way that everyone inside your organization is doing work, if they're not intuitively able to understand the strengths and limitations of AI as it stands today, then we often see that, you can get stuck. So it's really important that you just are deploying tools like a ChatGPT Enterprise so that everyone's familiar and able to use those. And then on the tops down component, then having like really strong buy-in from the board level of what are the big priorities, the bets that we want to make as an organization to really invest in truly transforming the way that our business operates. Whether that's, the process of lending out credit, whether that's the way that you interact with your customers through customer service, picking some of those really strategic things. And this is not something which is done on the side, as like a side project. It kind of needs to be core to the overall strategy of the overall business, because there are companies out there that are moving really quickly. And so if what we see there is that, when you have that tops down sponsorship from the senior executive level, those companies are the ones that are making great progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, what would you say are the key lessons that you've learned, or maybe some of the risks that you see in getting financial institutions to move beyond experimentation? Because I think what you said there was key in that, like, it's not about doing this side of desk, it's about doing this core. So core means in production level, maybe customer facing, maybe not customer facing, but certainly touching critical processes within the bank to actually make a change. How are you seeing institutions sort of push beyond experimentation, or what would you say are some of the principles that you're pushing for to get it more production?
Yeah, exactly. And to double click on that and expand on it, I think I heard from a customer recently that they felt like in the first half of the year, they were stuck in POC hell. Like lots of experiments happening, but not a lot of progress to production. And I think what's really promising is that, in 2025, we have seen these organizations move from POC to production for the first time. So your question's a good one, which is like, how are people doing that? What is it that's breaking beyond the POC stage?
That's awesome.
One of the first things, AI literacy is important. Executives and leaders actually leading from the front in their own personal use of AI is another key one, just around overall adoption. And when we talk about going to production, there's two categories, right? Employee productivity overall as a topic, whether that's software developers using tools like OpenAI's Codex agent to accelerate their workflows, or the use of a tool like ChatGPT connected into your enterprise data. Those are things that you can go live really quickly with because they're internal. And so like the
Right.
risk is lower. You're really just trying to accelerate people's productivity. When you're building externally facing experiences, for example, Revolut, one of our customers, have built their Rita assistant, like a Gen AI assistant on GPT-5, which is used in kind of customer support queries for end customers. So how on earth do you do that in a regulated environment? How can you take an AI model and expose it to your customers? Well, it's actually, the good news here is that there is a solution, and that is to build the right guardrails and evals.
Right.
And I'll just unpack those two terms because in regulated industries, it's true in financial services, it's true in healthcare and life sciences and pharmaceuticals. You really need the ability to kind of measure the performance of the solution. And when you have a chatbot, it's not like 1 + 1 = 2. There's kind of a open natural language conversation. But an eval is basically a test, and you can write a few thousand of these that says, hey, based on the user's input request, what kind of response do we expect the model to return? And you can build those in an automated way. And a lot of the time that we spend, my team and the technical teams at OpenAI who partner closely with these large enterprises, we can provide expert advice, guidance. Often we'll come in and show you how to do this directly, which means that you can actually then measure with a percentage accuracy the performance of the solution. And this enables you to go live with confidence, but also satisfy the regulator that the solution that you've built is incredibly performant. And so you'll often, anytime you speak to an OpenAI engineer giving you advice on this topic, they'll say, start with evals. We often spend, the first 3 months of a project writing the tests before we even start building the AI agent. Because if you don't have the tests written up front, you can't possibly know how you're tracking as you're building that solution out. You kind of have to have that as the foundation. And then having guardrails in place. Sometimes guardrails could be something simple like a calculation. If I'm extracting data from someone's pay stub to validate their income for a loan, then I can add the numbers up and check that they compute correctly. So not everything has to be an AI LLM request. It could just be a traditional kind of calculation or something that's more what we call deterministic. You can just calculate it with logic. And then the other really powerful component of guardrails is often we'll have one large language model check the work of a previous one. In many critical banking processes today, you may have like a maker-checker process, right? If you're doing very large transactions, often one person will do the work and a second person will check the work of the first person before that transaction goes through. And we can do the same thing inside an LLM solution. So you might say, here's the output that we produced that we're thinking of sending back to the user. Here's the inputs we gave. And then you have the LLM kind of double check all of that work. And this enables you to maximize the accuracy, put the right guardrails in place. And so these are just two examples, evals and guardrails, of techniques that you have to kind of layer on top of the AI model itself to make it really robust and reliable inside those production environments. And we see this, BBVA, also, a bank, I mentioned them earlier, they have an AI assistant built into their mobile banking app called Blue. And Blue can query your transaction history. You can actually set up payments to send money to a friend using this AI chatbot. And that's only possible because they've done a really amazing job at building these guardrails and evals into the end-to-end development process, which takes them from POC all the way to production.
That makes total sense. And I guess those evals and guardrails are also then how they can manage their internal audit and risk reporting and reporting to the regulator and all that. It's just amazing to see how an LLM can in some ways mirror an internal audit process. You would have somebody checking this anyway. So instead of a somebody, you can have another LLM doing that, which is super, super interesting. You say that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes like a mistake that's easy to make is to think, well, I've just got this model and I'm going to ask the model a question and it has one shot to get it right. And if it makes a single mistake, then the whole thing isn't going to work. None of our internal processes today work like that. Often for important decisions or for critical processes, you have a few people collaborating together to check each other's work and make sure that everything's really high quality. And we can create that same construct inside of these agentic AI applications. And this is where we partner deeply to give that advice and work closely with customers to kind of guide them through that process.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about BBVA, because I think it's actually very interesting. You know, you're doing the chatbot, but I understand there's a whole bunch of stuff you're planning with them. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, really exciting. We recently announced this new strategic phase of our partnership together. I spent a lot of time traveling back and forth to Madrid this year, working closely with them on this. And I think what's exciting there and the scale of their ambition is about deploying ChatGPT Enterprise to all employees. They really see this as kind of the super assistant that's going to assist everybody to be more productive. Some important things there, ChatGPT Enterprise, from a business context, we never train on any of the data. It's a secure enterprise-grade version of the tool. You can also connect it into your enterprise systems, right? So think about connecting into SharePoint, connecting into Google Drive, actually adding the intelligence of your entire organization into a tool like ChatGPT and not just relying on kind of searching the web. So you can have a really like enterprise context-enriched experience. But then beyond that, whether that's across customer service and kind of the external facing applications, like this Blue assistant in the mobile banking app, which they built, where we're going to enhance that much further. But then also internal processes. When you think about how to empower bankers who are very often interfacing with clients, helping them do account research, provide the best possible advice, preparing for meetings, following up after meetings when they have those external ones. So that's like a key component. Back office operations, I mentioned much earlier in my career, I was working on kind of automating all the paper that flows through a bank. And there's lots of things we're going to be doing with BBVA there to streamline some of those back office processes, which can ultimately just shorten approval timelines, shorten client onboarding, give a much better experience for BBVA's customers. And then we're working with them deeply on kind of expanding how their software developers can be productive. I think many banks today, and this probably resonates with many of your listeners, banks kind of are software companies in some ways. There's a lot of internal systems to build and maintain. There's also a lot of legacy knocking around. Banks were adopting technical systems back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And so anyone who's worked with an IBM mainframe and some of the legacy COBOL code there will know that it's a pretty challenging project to migrate a lot of that code. And so we're supporting them through some of those things as well. And then finally, in this kind of multidisciplinary approach across the entire business, the other one is around managing risk. How can you actually use AI to make better risk decisions? Because ultimately, many financial institutions, the business is about offering credit, which helps to stimulate small businesses, but by lending them money to stimulate the overall economy. So there's a lot of good that can be done by shortening credit approval timelines and actually making higher quality risk-based decisions, which is good for the bank's own balance sheet and book of risk as well.
Yeah, there's just so much value potential there, isn't there? I'm just curious to know from your perspective if there are any surprises maybe since you started, any sort of surprising successes or failures or things that, were kind of an assumption that may be obvious about how people adopt AI versus what you've seen. I'm just curious to know if there's anything there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 18 months ago or so when I joined OpenAI, there was still a narrative around kind of AI being quite expensive, like an extra cost. And that was true, actually, at the time. I'll give you one of my favorite statistics. So when we first launched GPT-4, if you were to consume it via our API, it would cost around $60 per million tokens. Doesn't really matter what tokens mean in this context, but about $60 per million something. Today, for the same level of intelligence, for our smartest model, GPT-5, it's 99% cheaper, right? It's just a few cents for the same kind of amount of intelligence. And that trend has been pretty consistent over the last couple of years of like the cost of intelligence falling as the models themselves get even smarter. And what that means in practice for business leaders is that often, people will be in a planning period now for how 2026 is going to unfold and where investments are going to be made. And so even if a use case looks a little bit out of reach from a cost perspective, if AI is like maybe not quite cheap enough today to make that viable, I'd recommend like still start building and start experimenting, because in 6 months from now, in 9 months from now, the cost will come down, and all of a sudden a whole new wave of use cases becomes accessible. So like the cost coming down, like to me, was surprising. I think many didn't expect it, and some still have this idea that AI is really expensive, but the costs have just been falling dramatically. Whilst at the same time, the pace of model intelligence increasing is accelerating. We launched GPT-5 back in August. A month ago, we launched GPT 5.1 and then just 1 month later, we launched GPT 5.2. So, you're going from like 2 or 3 months between model releases to 1 month between model releases. And I think you can expect that to accelerate even more into next year. And these are trends that it's kind of hard for our brains to kind of grasp this exponential. But we've seen this now continuing over a period of a couple of years, and you can kind of bet on that moving forwards as you plan your investments into next year.
There's something, I think that's really fascinating. There's also something in there about the kind of long tail legacy of, shall we say, slightly older models and how those get a hell of a lot cheaper over time. Because one of the things that I've picked up on as well is that intelligence in many ways is very important, but actually there are a lot of back office processes where maybe you could argue that the existing models today, or maybe some of the older models are kind of okay, right? And so if that price sort of just drops so much, then the business cases to implement those things across some of the back office processes just become a lot clearer as well. So I mean, it's a horrible analogy, but it's still a bit like you can have, I don't know, like an iPhone, but also you can use a feature phone for some things as well. And people still sell feature phones, and people still buy feature phones. There might be something about the tech that in the fullness of time that remains. It's not always about the kind of the thing that is like approaching AGI or AGI, but it might be about these other things as well that kind of came up along the way.
Yeah, and at OpenAI, we provide like a full suite of models. I think most people are familiar with the ones that they see inside of ChatGPT that people are using every day. And we now have over 800 million people every week using ChatGPT in the consumer space, which is like 10% of the world's population. So that for many people, AI is ChatGPT. But in the background, we have GPT-5, GPT-5 Mini, GPT-5 Nano. So we launched these kind of like smaller, cheaper, faster models because many use cases, they don't need that frontier level of intelligence. We now have over 1 million business customers who are building on our technology, and millions of developers worldwide kind of building their own AI experiences on top. And many of them are using kind of some of the smaller models for those faster use cases where it makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, on that note, that wraps up part one. So in part one, we laid the situation. So what's going on right now? We talked about Matt's background. We talked about how AI is being adopted across Europe, and we set the stage for the future. So we're going to shift into what's next for the sector coming right up.
Hey folks, David Breer here, CEO of 11FS. Here's something you might not know about me. I get a lot of people trying to impersonate me online, fake profiles, scam emails, the lot. And a big part of that comes from data brokers, hundreds of them, quietly collecting and selling your personal information. Your phone number, email, home address, job title, all out there and all fueling identity theft, scam calls, and spam. If you've ever searched your own name online, hands up, who hasn't? You'll know how exposed you really are. That's why we've partnered with Incogni. They contact 230 plus data brokers and tell them to delete your information properly and legally under GDPR and CCPA. Doing it yourself would take hundreds of hours. Incogni automates the whole thing and keeps working with repeat removal requests if your data reappears. I tried it, and within days, saw brokers deleting my data. You can even protect your family members too. FinTech Insider listeners get 60% off an annual plan. Just head to incogni.com/FinTechInsider and use code FinTechInsider. And yes, it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. You'll find the link in the description.
Welcome back. Now, in this section, we're going to focus on AI's future in financial services and how banks, fintechs, and insurers could be leveraging it strategically into the future. So to kick this off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the concept of AI becoming an operating system, right? Sort of leveling up a little bit beyond that. We're using it as a tool for productivity or a tool for a specific use case, but into that broader, view of how do you operate a financial institution around this new technology?
This is a really great question. And I think I was actually speaking to a very senior banker from one of the world's biggest banks yesterday about this exact question. Imagine you were to start a bank today from scratch with all of the technology that's available. How might you design the entire organization to work differently? I think for many years, there have been some processes that have been incredibly manual. That has created like a slow end user experience for customers. It's created a lot of cost in the way that those processes operate. So in terms of thinking like, how can we actually redesign an organization? And then for many companies, given that they already exist, transition into that new way of working. The first thing, as we were kind of discussing in part one, is just around continuing to bet on this trend of continued intelligence increasing and cost decreasing. So what does that look like in practice? We're seeing, if I take the example of private equity, right? So we've spoken a bit about banks, but if we look at the private equity space, I know previously analyst research was a limiting factor in terms of the speed and quality of decision-making that could be made around investments. And now we're seeing that become totally unblocked. It's not just about one person using a tool to explore some ideas or run a research query. You could actually systematically and automatically repeat research in response to changing global macroeconomic conditions. Think about when tariffs changed, which happened a lot this year. How could you reevaluate your entire portfolio in a matter of minutes to understand how these new policy or global changes actually impact the balance of risk or an opportunity in a portfolio and perhaps inform where you might take action next? So I think one of the key things that I'm spending time advising global financial institutions to do is to kind of reimagine a process from scratch. If you just take the inputs and the outputs that you're trying to achieve and almost forget, what exists today, how might you redesign that entire process from scratch? And in some of these cases around research, you can kind of see how there are certain triggers in the news events, which then actually go and run research across an entire portfolio of investments. We're seeing across many private equity firms as well, some of the highest rates of adoption of kind of ChatGPT, which itself is a tool for enterprise productivity, but over time we're now starting to add not just read actions for doing research, but also write actions. The ability for an agent on your behalf to go and actually start taking actions inside of some of your other enterprise systems. And then finally, another area I think where we're seeing a total reimagining of the way that business currently operates is around the way that customers and consumers get to interact with and experience many of these financial institutions as brands. I hope that the days are almost long gone where I have to sit on hold for 30 minutes and punch the numbers into the keypad to try and get to speak to the right person, and actually the opportunity to have a 24/7 always on access to kind of the information that I need at my fingertips. And customer service isn't always just about like solving a problem that's gone wrong or getting help with a specific request. Sometimes that can also be proactive. How can I look at my changing financial circumstances and then proactively receive guidance, tips, or advice unique to me that actually transform my relationship with my bank versus today, which can often be quite reactive.
What's interesting about that is that we see, and there is a statistic out there, you guys will probably have it, that so many people, a large sort of double-digit percentage of people are already using ChatGPT for, financial advice. They're doing it themselves. They're just doing it themselves. There's people uploading their entire transaction history and be like, tell me how to do better, or like, Tell me what stocks I should be investing in, all of this kind of stuff. And banks and financial institutions are quite rightly far behind that. But to your point, you can already see that some of these initial deployments of intelligence and insights, like what you're doing with BBVA, are already kind of showing you where this is going. Like the trend line is all of these very complex personalization, insights, all of this kind of stuff can in the future be sort of provided by anybody. If you were re-architecting a bank from the start, you would think about how you provide that personalization from the beginning to the end. So it's just so curious to see when you work in this sector, whenever you see a drop where a fintech or a bank does a thing that it just edges things slightly forward into that kind of agentic world, you kind of wonder, okay, like what's next? Like what is the next implementation of this? Because the way I'm already using ChatGPT is like 10 times further ahead. So how long is it going to take for the kind of the risk culture in these organizations to like move there? It's so fascinating.
Yeah, I think we are seeing, I've felt a shift in the last kind of 6 months or so of these institutions really seeing the size of the opportunity and taking a step forwards. And I'll give you another example, kind of an internal one, where we're seeing transformation in the way that business happens today. So the London Stock Exchange Group, they provide data to many financial institutions that helps them to make great decisions, to understand kind of current market prices, to get access to market news. They recently launched a brand new connector or an app that's available inside of ChatGPT for enterprises, which means that now if I'm an investment banker and I want to get a spot price on a particular commodity, or I want to understand the spread on a particular currency, then actually I can do that in a conversational manner directly inside of ChatGPT. And so I think we're probably also going to start to see, there's this new way that users are going to interact with your institution. This entire new surface, which is Gen AI conversational chatbots like ChatGPT. We're going to start to bring in more data from external sources, and for the user, that's great. It means that they can, from one single pane of glass, get the insights that they need. And for enterprises, I think the way to think about that shift that's just happening, and we've already seen it in search, like in the retail space. Now, many people are moving from traditional search engines to a Gen AI-led search experience because they can actually investigate further. I think we're going to start to see a similar level of disruption happening, across banking, financial services, financial data. And the really innovative companies are kind of riding that wave and being some of the first in the market, such as LSEG, to offer their data embedded directly inside those experiences.
I'm glad you mentioned the LSEG example, actually, because I was going to ask you, like, how important are MCPs, Model Context Protocol, to all of this? And maybe actually start by giving us a bit of a definition for our audience around like what is an MCP?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's always good to zoom out and take a second. I'll go even one step further back, which is it was actually only around just over a year ago that these kind of AI chatbots started to get the ability to search the web. So some of you may remember maybe 2 years ago, you'd ask a question and the large language model would just answer it based on the data it was trained on, but it couldn't really do current affairs. It couldn't really do news because it couldn't search. And so we gave the large language models access to this tool of web search that it could then use. So every time you ask a question, if it was about current affairs or something recent, then, ChatGPT could go and search the web and find the most relevant content and answers. So, the web is one valuable source of information that these models can get access to, but especially in an enterprise context, there's so much data that's critical to the way that a fintech or a financial services company operates that's not on the web, right? It's with a market data provider. It's internal to your own systems, perhaps, not something as simple as SharePoint. It could even be an old system from the 80s that you need to connect to. And so MCP, or Model Context Protocol, you can kind of think of it, for those who are familiar with like an API, the way that traditionally software is able to interact with other pieces of software. An MCP is like a little server which runs, it's like a modern API to really simplify it. And it enables AI tools like ChatGPT to actually go and retrieve data from other systems. So the short answer to your first question is how critical are they going to be? I think the answer is very critical. We see the value that people get out of tools like ChatGPT exponentially increase when you start connecting it into the data that you actually use to drive your business decisions. Whether you connect that to your data lake, your CRM, your customer database, or to other data from other trusted third-party providers. All of a sudden now, the questions that you ask, the answers you'll receive will be enriched by all this high-quality data, which, forget AI for a second. How do you actually normally make decisions in your business? It's usually by searching across all that internal data, not just doing your job based on what you found on the web. And so I think that's a trend. The adoption of these MCP connectors, the ability to get that data, is going to accelerate throughout 2026.
Yeah, amazing. No, it'll be really interesting to see that. I want to just change tack a little bit and talk about the financial sector in Europe. So your role is looking across Europe, helping boost the financial sector by integrating OpenAI. How does this boost competitiveness, would you say, in Europe? Because it's quite a hot topic at the moment for I don't know, like there's a lot of regulation going on at the moment. There's a lot of competition between the US and Europe to try to attract and foster innovation.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think one that's, the European competitiveness topic has been litigated in many places. I think what I'm hearing from customers today, when I speak with NatWest in the UK or Revolut, or when we're engaging with more specialist banks, you've got like Alika Bank and Oak North, who are working with small and medium-sized enterprises. I'm seeing innovation everywhere. I think Europe actually can sometimes, people can be a bit down on us and the way that regulation gets in the way. And it's true, compliance with regulation does take time. It does take resources and attention. But there are many examples alongside BBVA, Santander, also in Spain. A European financial services regulated enterprise rolling out ChatGPT to more than 15,000 employees, deploying AI in customer-facing scenarios. So I often challenge business leaders. Sometimes I do get the objection, well, we'd love to do all that, but we're not a tech company, we're a bank, and therefore, it can't be done for these reasons. I think there's plenty of examples now that actually, where there's a will, there's a way. And of course, you have to do that in partnership with the regulator, keep them in the loop, provide the right data through the evals that we were discussing earlier, the way that you evaluate the solution performance. But I think Europe has an opportunity here through adopting AI to dramatically increase its competitiveness in the financial services industry. I also was chatting with a US colleague yesterday. I said, like, who is the Revolut in the US? Where is the challenger bank of the US? And it's just the ecosystem there looks slightly different. There are some much larger players who kind of dominate. But I think we can hold that up here in the UK. We have Monzo. There are other kind of challenger banks that have done really well, and so I think it's exciting to see that trend has the potential to continue, and hopefully the way that Europe chooses to regulate moving forwards continues to stimulate and enhance innovation and not stifle it. But I have high hopes for that.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are a lot more present and close, very successful fintechs here that big banks and big institutions can look to. And I hope, and maybe it's a question as well, how have those objections been evolving over time? Because I absolutely, like maybe a year or 2 years ago, the objections were exactly as you said, just, no, how are we going to do this? Not possible, all that kind of stuff. What are the typical types of objections you're getting? Or is it actually a question of, no, my God, we need this, and how on earth are we going to do this? It's the how more than the what.
I think there is a how. I think sometimes that there is the regulatory landscape can look a little overwhelming. So sometimes it can be a bit scary to get started. But once you start working through it, actually there are great answers there. At OpenAI, we offer full data residency within Europe, or we now recently announced UK data residency dedicated as well. So you can ensure that your data will be stored encrypted at rest, within Europe. And we also then see to flip it around a little bit, there's a huge opportunity for regulated industries to use AI to increase compliance with regulation. NatWest governs AI through an internal code of conduct, which ensures privacy and transparency, and then uses it to assist in mitigating financial crime. Revolut also have a FinCrime agent that they're using to try and detect and block financial crime from happening. So I think, whilst adversaries, bad actors out there in the world are using AI today to try and get past the defenses that many of these financial institutions have built up, there's also a huge opportunity to use them to improve the compliance posture of your organization if you embed AI into those workflows that today take time. If you think about KYC and client onboarding, trying to do the necessary research to validate that someone is who they say they are. You can actually then be applying AI to accelerate and improve that process, which gives you a high quality decision and actually improves the end customer experience.
Yeah. And this is also something that I say to some of the objections around compliance is, no, you're not going to be able to audit how the neurons fire to give you the result, but you can ask it what it did and it'll tell you. And if you ask a human to ask you what it did, you ask a human. You can ask the LLM 10,000 times, 100,000 times, and it's that sort of scale of feedback, answer, response that I think is just so important for these organizations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think right now, pointing to all these examples that we've been discussing of institutions that have worked through the regulatory requirements and actually now are deployed at scale globally inside their organizations, including in Europe, I think is the light that leads the way for other institutions to follow in their footsteps.
Yeah, I agree. So we've been talking about it, like lots of future use cases. One of the areas maybe we haven't talked about so much is insurance. Guys, it might be good to talk about that because insurance is so interesting, right? Like how you quantify and measure risk and how you pay out. There's like a lot of very interesting use cases that I've seen in US and Silicon Valley. There's some very interesting like verticalized businesses that are doing kind of end to end all the way from the kind of the phone call through to the claims processing. Like, are you seeing anything in insurance that's interesting for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And from my time before OpenAI, when I was working on that document processing startup, there's so much paper when you think about claims, think about underwriting, in reinsurance when you're kind of analyzing and working with reinsurance contracts. We have a huge reinsurance industry here in the UK through the London markets, and so the opportunity there for automation is enormous. We recently announced we're working closely with CAA, a lighthouse brand here in the UK, and who offer insurance to their customers, and they're taking kind of a multidisciplinary approach to the use of AI through empowering employees with ChatGPT, but then also solving many internal and back office processes and streamlining those using our models. So I think insurance is an area which there's a huge opportunity for disruption, especially because there's a use case that I found particularly interesting. When in commercial insurance, when an insurance broker is trying to gather quotes on behalf of their client, they build this PDF presentation and they send it around to 10 insurers and say, hey, can you give me a quote on this thing I'm trying to insure? It's not like each of these companies are doing something similar, with different. It's literally the same document being fired off to 10 different places, and so I think there's a huge opportunity there. If you could just automate that process with AI to take that unstructured data to all the information about the asset you're trying to underwrite, and then automate that process with AI, it then becomes all about just gathering the context information, doing research, and then being able to make a fast decision.
Okay, so in the last little bit, what I want to do is I just want to kind of put it into overdrive a little bit and talk about like the future or the there, particularly when it comes to human augmentation or human replacement. Because I think a lot of the discussion that we've been having on these use cases is, how do you maybe keep the human in the loop, but how do you automate those processes? You can kind of see where this is going. Does the human leave that loop eventually? Like, what do you think about that? Like, do you think it will replace roles in our sector, or not?
So I think there's a lot of worthwhile discussion around jobs when it comes to AI. I actually think maybe the framing needs to be thought about a little bit differently, though, which is that AI isn't automating jobs; it's automating tasks. And our jobs are composed of tasks. That is true. But what we're consistently seeing across the industry is that there are some tasks which are repetitive, manual, time-consuming, which once automated actually free up those people to take on much higher value, much more strategic work. A nice example of this is software development, which has been one of the earliest kind of job roles to be massively disrupted by AI. We've gone from a place, a year ago where, AI was being used to assist software code creation to now where, at OpenAI, 80% of all the code that we ship is written by an AI,
Wow.
managed by a software developer. And what's happened through that transition, you might say, well, okay, do we need less software developers? The answer is no. Actually, it turns out we were massively constrained by the number of software developers that were available. And so with our ability to create incredibly high quality, robust production grade code, we're now just writing lots more software. The roadmap of things that you planned for your technical teams that might have taken a year previously, you can now deliver in a single quarter. And so we see organizations just pulling forward things on their roadmap that they couldn't previously do because they've actually unlocked the potential of these really valuable workers by automating the tasks, which were kind of more manual and more repetitive, and letting the software developers now spend their time working on the more high value, really interesting work. And we see this happening across other roles as well. If you take the example of an underwriter in insurance, how much time does an underwriter spend reading and analyzing risk contracts, doing research, transcribing data between systems to try and compose a quote based on the risk models that they use internally?
Yeah.
When really, the value of an underwriter is not their ability to copy and paste data between systems. It's to make a decision using their expertise and experience about the risk that's being underwritten. And so you just dramatically increase the amount of work that one of those people can do. And I think over time, and this is true even in my own team, I think we will raise out the bar, our expectation of what one person is capable of doing. A similar example might be, when we move from having calculators to the computer in mathematics, the kind of test that you would set for students at school is, you just make it much harder. You set them a bigger task because with the available tools at their fingertips, people can just do more. I'm really excited for what that means across the financial services industry as this value starts to be unlocked. I think we will always find more interesting, more valuable things to do. And especially once we clear some of the kind of more repetitive work and tasks, that actually creates a lot of capacity for us to work on much more valuable tasks.
And people can actually spend more time thinking and making decisions, as you say, is what people want to do. All right, that's amazing. Thank you, Matt. On that note, that wraps up today's discussion. A big thank you to our special guest, Matt. Tell us, where can people connect and find more about you?
Yeah, so thanks for the conversation. We'd love to have a conversation if you're thinking about your own AI strategy and how you might transform your own organization with AI. You can contact us via our website at openai.com. There's a talk to sales form, of course. Embedded within our sales team are all of our technical experts and engineers as well. So we'll be here to give you advice. And if you want to learn more about kind of how to up-level the AI literacy within your own organization, you can go to academy.openai.com. We've got loads of free resources there. There's a whole section just about using AI at work to help you and your team members kind of really upskill and make sure you're getting the most out of what's possible with this technology.
Awesome. Yeah, go and check that out, everyone. And you can find me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard, follow our podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us to make it better and helps others find the show. As always, if you want to join the conversation, find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or FinTech Insider or email podcast@11fs.com. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Retail investment in the UK is the lowest in the G7. According to the Bank of England, there is over £280 billion sitting in UK accounts earning no interest. Something has to change. Financial firms in the UK must look at making investing accessible, contextual, and trusted through everyday platforms. That means bringing investment journeys to the point of need, alongside spending, saving, and budgeting, and within platforms that already play a meaningful role in customers' lives. We dive into this and more in our latest report, Taking Advantage of the Embedding Investing Opportunity, produced in association with Secor. Download your copy today at 11fs.com/embedded-investing.